So, in a nutshell, how do you think that the funnel impacted the film community and culture within Toronto and perhaps maybe Canada more generally? I know that's sort of a large question to tackle, but...
The funnel was extremely, extremely important. And it is a tragedy that this handful of people that were doing such amazing work were kind of outvoted at this one meeting and lost their capacity to run the funnel and lost the capacity to shape its direction, because I think the funnel, had it continued on the path that it was beginning to move, with people like David McIntosh and Dot Tour so heavily involved and so much kind of critical thinking and energy happening, I think the funnel would have transitioned into a very interesting place, right? Instead, I think what happened was the funnel sort of fractured, and that is sad for a number of reasons, right? Some of the people from the funnel moved in the direction of Lift, and when that happened initially, Lift was pretty much a documentary-driven, independent, drama-driven production facility. And so it was less experimental and less art interdisciplinary than the funnel was. It was very early out of the gate with its interest in interdisciplinarity, right? Another thing that was really important about the funnel was its engagement in networks. They were experimenting with new technologies. They were looking at networks that were defined by themes and defined by areas of interest, and we're building networks, that I think it could have been really interesting. To me, it's all proto-internet, in some ways, and it would have been interesting if they had maintained their sort of capacity to, have that as a base of operations, how much the funnel would have probably, moved into international art networks and strengthened that position. I think that the funnel was a hotbed for some kinds of production. It's interesting to see kind of one thing that, some people that have come out of the funnel have ended up becoming very influential in terms of the academic world and the theory world in Canada. Absolutely. Again, I mentioned, David McIntosh or Dot Tour, Cass Banning, all of them are people that I think have had a big impact. And I think that the funnel provided a way to Canadianize some of the experimental film practice that was happening at that time, like Michael Snow and Joyce Whelan. I mean, it provided a place, a center, so that part of our culture wasn't just diffused into New York kind of permanently. I think it had an important leveraging role for that. It was so hard to see experimental film from elsewhere. It was so difficult to see it. It was so difficult to rent it. It was so difficult to buy it. So CFMBC also became a kind of a beneficiary, as did DEC, Development Education Center. There were a number of different sort of spin-off and different places that were a bit, not to say that CFMBC was a spin-off of the funnel, not at all, because I think the CFMBC is arguably older, but it was, the funnel provided a place where what the CFMBC was distributing could make sense, right? Now, I think it's on, for a while there was a long medieval period where it seemed like experimental film almost disappeared under the shadow of video production, so that people began to think that independent artist production was entirely related to video production. There were very few, you think of somebody like Guerini Tarosian and stuff, but there weren't that many people who kind of kept the standard, Mike Holboom, whatever, going during the post-funnel years. And the quality of discourse and networks and stuff is greatly diminished, and video art reigns supreme at the Venice Biennale and other instances of exporting Canadian media art abroad. But I think that may be changing as we see an amalgamation between cinema and video to the point of indistinguishability in the technologies, that now an interest begins to emerge in the histories and the methods of production. I find that for me, working with compositing and remix and recombinant media and some of the sorts of approaches that we were using at the funnel way back when, using analog means, some of those things have been very fertile in terms of teaching and in terms of a whole bunch of different kinds of collaborations that I've been involved in. So maybe the kind of approach to the image and the idea of the image as a sort of a text, the theoretical, the intervention capacity of the image. You know, maybe we're circling back to some aspects of that. And in that way, the funnel has certainly been seminal in Toronto and probably in Canada too.